Oh, hello, Chris.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. Up for Dan.
Howdy.
She made it back from Japan, huh?
Yes. I'm a little jet lagged.
Leave it, man. What were you there for W3C? I think you said.
Yeah, it was a tag meeting. It's the group that I co-chair, and we have one member who is based in Japan, and we also have a member in Beijing who was supposed to come, but unfortunately wasn't able to come. But we're always asking the Sangwan who lives in Japan to, travel to London and travel to Reykjavik and travel to Boston and all these places. So every once in a while, it's good to have a meeting in Japan. And he can host us. He works for Google. He hosted us at Google's
Nice.
offices in Japan, in Tokyo.
Well, I mean, there's a lot worse places you could go for a meeting.
That is true. That is very true. Yes. So yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I took a couple of days to bookend the trip with some Japan tourism in both sides, but
Nice. I would definitely do the same. I think it's going to be pretty light today.
yeah, we're gonna focus on the use case talk.
Yeah, I'm gonna spend the hour going through it. Like whether anyone showed up or not was my assumption. So, all right, we'll just get cracking. I'm gonna share the doc once I find it.
Yeah,
Let's see this screen here. We'll avoid the formalities of starting a meeting because no one's here, which is lovely. Just do me a favor and sign. Actually, I can just sign you in, Dan. Oh wait, we got someone else. Saba, hello.
Hello, hello.
How do I spell your name? APP.
I think you got to transpose the E and the L in Apple.
Did I get it backwards? APPEL. Yep, you're right.
it's AVPEL.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm from Nokia.
If I was smart, I would have just copy and pasted Dan's name from down here, but I'm not. So
It just sounds like more work.
I am not a smart person. It's all right. Let's just work on this doc then. I think, yeah, we've all been around. All right. All right. So I spent some time. Holy cow, where'd all these people coming from? Like, this can be a real meeting. That's fine. All right. So anyway, I spent some time. I was on the road last week. So I looked through this a bit and made some changes. Nothing major, but I thought I wanted to just go through it again with some people to make sure this still makes sense. I'm going to suggest I'll put a link to this in the chat. If I can find the chat. I don't know where my chat is. There it is. Zoom is hard. But so my thought was just to go through it, and if people have thoughts or ideas, we'll write them down. We'll wordsmith it a little bit, and then when we're done, we're done. I'm not looking to kill a ton of time here. So I don't remember who was here last week, so I'll just go over this again. What we did last week is Kate Stewart started putting this document together like a really long time ago. And we basically the top is notes, so we're going to ignore all that. And the bottom is just identifying some of the use cases this group sees for SBOMs. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's unfortunately not. And so let's start at the top and go through and see what makes sense. If anyone has any comments,
When you
just
say
speak up.
sorry, when you say bottom, you mean everything that starts at use cases.
Yeah,
Here.
right.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. And if anyone has any questions or comments, just jump in. We don't need to worry about hand raising or anything. There's not enough people to matter today, which is great. I enjoy small working groups like this. You can get a lot done because we aren't going to argue for 25 minutes over some detail. Oh, anyway. All right, cool. All right, user needs. Okay, so the first one, we should probably, do we need to clarify that? Yes, I think we do. So we're talking
Yeah,
about
I mean, yeah.
the consumers of SBOMs is the user in this context, right? Does that make sense? Is that right?
Yes, I think so. And I think that maps, does that map into the actors list, which is basically what's below where it says producers of software, consumers of software? Or do we need a separate list of who we're talking about here?
We need a list, you're right. This is wrong. So what we actually want is actors, I think. There's user, what?
Well, there's a reason I was pushing for the term user need, which is that it maps onto some of, kind of like some of the other stuff that I've been talking about in terms of thinking about things as a user need, but I'm not
Well, let's
particular. I'm not particular about it. It's just a matter of like the problem with the term use cases is that sometimes use cases can be really super granular and sometimes they can be like very high level, and like thinking about things in terms of a user need tends to focus people's mind. But I wasn't involved in the meeting last week, so don't let me hijack things.
No, this is good, Dan. I mean, we didn't really define user. I think we let it flop around. And you have a good point. There's these personas exist kind of in the context of the use cases, but at the same time, the use cases are kind of all over because we've got producers of software, and they obviously create these SBOMs in certain places. And we have the consumers of it, which theoretically are taking SBOMs from somewhere else or potentially generating them themselves. And so I think user isn't very clear in this context. Because a user is a consumer in some instances, and it's going to be like a developer or a producer in other instances. Right, someone is typing.
May I ask a dumb question?
Yes.
How is this distinct from the key SBOM users and personas?
Where are those? It's probably not.
Right below it.
Oh, this. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I don't know if user is important. No, it is. It is. And the reason it is because when we define the use cases, we want very solution focused use cases, like why are you doing this? Where I think you can end up in a situation where someone will say, our use case is generating SBOMs. And like, that's not a use case. That's something you're doing. Like, why are you making these SBOMs? What is the purpose and goal of that? So I think the user needs perspective puts a focus, if I edit out, I'm suggesting. I'm going to
So
say,
maybe we could think of it as like, what are you doing with the SBOM?
yes.
Actually, I would say, well, no, I would, it's not what are you doing? It's why are you doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you're doing presumably follows from why.
But I mean, I'm trying to write something that would. Sorry, so I'm trying to write something that kind of like, to me, scans like a user need, you know, it's a little bit more like, not necessarily a story, because the story is all, is, you know, a longer thing, but it's like, they run it, you know, that a person working in an SBA, in an OSPA, which is one of the key user personas, you know, wants to evaluate security characteristics of a software library. They utilize a tool, you know, a tool that evaluates an SBOM associated with a specific build of that library in order to, you know, evaluate these characteristics. Something like that, right? To me, that's a user need. And it's like, if it's instructive about not only what the SBOM has in it, but what the tools.
I mean, why
landscape.
isn't that just a use case though, Dan?
Sorry.
How is this not a use case?
I guess only because sometimes people might say a use case is something quite more granular, like and it's articulated from the perspective of the user, right? That's the other thing. It's like a use case could be a system use case. It could be like a you know, written, the system must do this, or you know, written more like requirements. But if we think about it from the perspective of the people that are using it, then it puts everything in focus into making sure that it's useful to people.
Yes.
So
I'm going
I
to add
guess
a
it's just
for
a way.
example.
It's just a way to formulate the use cases. That's, I think, was the point of putting this in here as user needs perspective, that when we're writing these use cases, we should be trying to think about them from the perspective of the person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yes, the license. Yes. Who's the anonymous hippo?
That would be me. So, I mean, licenses and vulnerabilities are pretty obvious. What are some of the ones that are less obvious?
That's hard to explain in a sentence. The use cases, well, I mean, this is the use cases, right? I think this is where we start getting the use case territory. And I think maybe some of these use cases need to be tightened up a little bit if we think about it in that context. Because, like, for example, obviously we say, what are the licenses in my dependencies? I mean, why? Why do you care? Right? That's a use case, though, I think. And it's pretty specific. Vulnerabilities gets a little more squishy because I think vulnerability is a feature of SBOM that is used by multiple use cases. But then you've got, like, for example, I see customers, they just want to know what they have. Because when the next log4j event happens, they want to type log4j in a search box, and then they know exactly what they have, where they have it. You see people worried about runtime stuff, like what is actually running in my infrastructure, which is one that comes up a lot. And it's always amusing because if you scan all of your containers, you might have like millions of containers, but you might only have 30 that are actually running, you know, and that's like another instance where the SBOM can drive a feature like that. I think one of the other pieces to this, I just had this conversation the other day. We talk about SBOMs a lot, like there's some like singular entity, but SBOM is just really a tool in a larger ecosystem. SBOMs will never exist by themselves. And if they do, like, you've done something terribly wrong.
I don't know what you mean. If you have something that is all by itself and a file with an SBOM in it, that's not a mistake. Now, clearly, if an SBOM is just random bits, that's a problem.
No, David, you misunderstand.
Yes,
I'm
please.
saying there's often discussion saying things like you need an SBOM, but like, why do you need an SBOM? What are you going to do with that SBOM? Just
Right.
having an SBOM for the sake of having an SBOM is silly. But saying
Agreed.
I have an SBOM and I'm going to use it for license compliance or understanding my vulnerabilities or doing something with it is,
Okay.
even if customers are asking for it, that's a reason. But I think
Right.
just saying like an SBOM is not a tautology.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. All right, we're really drilling down, and I'm wondering if let me step back. And when people ask me why do you want an SBOM, I say there are many reasons, but for security there are exactly two. One, I'm estimating security risk of a program, either one I already have or one I'm thinking about adding. And number two, I is the log4shell problem. I hear that there's a big vulnerability. Tell me everything that has it. So estimating security risk was one, and I'm looking for it everywhere too.
I mean,
There are many others, but I think if we don't include those two, that's a problem.
but we have those two down here, right? Those are use cases. I think we're putting too much content up here right now. I think this just needs to explain we want a focus on
Yeah.
the kind of the why and the perspective.
Yeah.
Would the time be better spent going through the personas that we currently have and just making sure that each of them has this Y component?
Yes, I think so. I think we're putting too much content in this section that belongs beneath it. So let's keep going. Personas. All right, there are more. These are the initial set. All right, developers. So we list developers as creating open source, building on open source in the enterprise. Is building on open source in the enterprise just like an enterprise developer? Do we? Because our use cases, I feel like, don't focus entirely on open source, but the developer persona seems to focus on open source.
Do we want to, is creating open source actually multiple things? Because there's like evaluating libraries that I might want to use in my open source application. Like say I'm building an application or a web app or anything, right? Evaluating what I want to use, evaluating libraries or other dependencies. And then there's also generating builds, in which case you're so there are two, but so it feels to me like developers also have this they have this dual, they're going to be using a tool to evaluate the SBOMs that other people are generating with their builds, and they're also going to be creating builds with which they generate an SBOM.
Yes. And I can even think that if you're a developer of an open source project, that's not the same as a developer at Sneak necessarily, right? Like Sneak probably has developers working on open source and developers incorporating open source into the product and developers working on product features. And do we want to split developers apart in that context, or we just want to leave developers squishy and hand wave it away?
I think we want to leave developers squishy, but I think we want to be specific in the cases where we are talking about open source.
Okay, I'm okay with that. So I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to say that we are leaving the definition of developer squishy on purpose. There are many, I can't spell. Oh my goodness.
I would say vague instead of squishy.
There, what's that? Oh, squish, fine, fine, your word works too. Many different developer personas, these. Ah, anonymous hippo, you have to move. I can't see the word I'm typing.
Sorry.
No, that's pretty good. It'll be clarified in the use cases. All right, cool. That makes sense to me. I like that. All right. So we're gonna leave developer squishing. I'm okay with that. So then we said application, product architects, product management, generating, architecting SBOM generation, integrating SBOM content, security champions. I do think all of these need better descriptions. I'm just going to add a note. All of these need better persona descriptions. Okay. Sure. Does anyone have any comments or questions on that? I feel, again, it's kind of squishy, but I think it gets the point across.
On which,
Which what?
your question was, which, I'm asking which part gets the point across, which,
Oh,
lot of
application,
edits.
product architects, product management. So I feel like the intent here is this is someone who is planning how SBOMs enter and exit your, I guess, just development universe.
I would add what you just said under that.
Yeah, that's probably the point.
That's actually quite helpful context if that's the.
All right, cool.
Just to comment about the first noun there, application, should this refer to a role as opposed to?
It's meant to be like an
Application.
application architect.
Okay.
I'll add that. We actually discussed that last week also. Of course, we didn't write it down because that would be easy. All right. Last week, 2 weeks ago, whatever. Open source program office, manage SBOMs, SBOM product manager. So this one was interesting. Sarah Evans said last week that at Dell, they have actual SBOM product managers whose job is like wrangling SBOMs around the organization, which is amazing to me. So SBOM product manager,
Like
dependency management.
just the SBOMs?
Apparently, yeah, like that's the focus. I mean, I would assume they do other things as well, because I feel like that's probably not a full-time job.
It
But-
feels to me like that would go hand in hand with understanding what tooling you're using with
I-
the SBOMs. You know?
I would not disagree with that statement. Yeah. Okay, dependency, what?
Do we maybe also want to call out compliance here? I think in some
Yeah.
organizations, this will be wrapped into,
Yeah, compliance, that was one that was on my mind as well. It can fit in I feel like a few of these different places. So like, for example, at the downstream customers, government organization level, as well as in the security engineering section. These are just two below. Auditing is another word that I would like to see in here somewhere.
And OSPO, so we want compliance and auditing.
Compliance, auditing, and then the third one that is kind of the also kind of spread across all these spaces is would be legal, for licensing and for IP.
So we have, so compliance and auditing, are those focused on the open source specifically as part of the OSPO, or are they expected to do other parts of that or work with someone else? I guess it depends, doesn't it?
And I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, so compliance means many things to different people, right? If you
Sure.
talk to an InfoSec team, compliance is going to mean something like SOC 2. If you talk to your federal team, it's going to mean 853. If you talk to your open source team, it's probably going to mean license compliance.
Right. So yeah, it's definitely an overloaded term. And one of the reasons why it kind of stretches across these different several different of these what are we calling these personas?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you're right.
And auditing is the same thing, obviously. Matt, just you can just talk. You don't have to raise your hand.
Yeah.
Typically, I bound the OSPO to the general term of corporate security and legal compliance, because they set the rules and that's all encompassing, but it's relative to the corporation. So it's, I can type that in chat.
I don't understand what you mean. I don't. Can you clarify that? I'm not following.
I think might be saying that in the large companies, this is kind of all orchestrated in some level of parallelism. And
Yeah, they set the corporate guidelines that all the, the oversight for all the divisions and projects and products for the whole corporation, basically. So they are setting the rules and guidelines and policies that you must work within.
And the compliance can mean different things to the different teams, but they're all sort of acting in concert. The left hand knows what the right hand is doing. Hopefully.
Yeah, I think one thing we're struggling with here is different organizations are going to divide up these functions into different divisions or different roles, and the enterprise organization is going to look different than small and medium enterprise.
I was going to say, all the specific security compliance programs, reporting things are all assumed to be part of that. But, typically corporations don't talk in terms of specifics. They don't adhere to one. Typically, they create their own policies and guidelines and things like that map to one or more external frameworks, basically.
That makes sense. And yeah, I remember that now. You're shaking cobwebs loose from some past things I've done. Yes. All right. I don't want to dwell on this one too much either. I don't think we're going to get out of personas today, which is good. Security engineering. This one feels fine to me. Does anyone have any additional comments or questions?
I was wondering if we should call out, since it has direct alignment with work being done in vulnerability work groups, CERT teams.
I mean, we have P-cert here.
Because I know that one of my largest consumers in IBM for our OSPO and for our CISO teams is our P-cert team or our CERT team. Because they're interested in what tools they need to employ to SBOM or whatever to do reverse lookups and vulnerabilities and how to analyze things like that. So
I mean, does this not cover that? I
yeah, I just want to. So yeah, I mean, I see P-cert there. So yeah, I'm just wondering what. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Procurement. See, like procurement, is procurement a persona? Maybe. What is how does procurement not fall? I mean, man, you probably have more insight into this than the rest of us. Like, is procurement separate from the OSPO in this context? Like, does
When I see
Yeah,
procurement, I see.
might have a, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that they might have their, you might have an organization which has a procurement department, which really wants to, they might have SBOM related requirements that yeah, that are,
So when I see procurement, three things come to mind with, whereas we have the CIO office, who basically has, canonical tooling they procure that support security and compliance. So they procure and host tools for us. The CISO team actually has their own subset of tools they host that are not covered by the CIO office. And then a separate context, but related, is that a lot of that tooling is augmented by mergers and acquisitions. So we actually have mergers and acquisition teams have separate tooling to analyze third-party software before we make them a partner or whatever. Yeah. Those are the three teams I answer to and get asked questions of every other day.
But those don't strike me as, that's like vendor procurement. And now that I read this,
Well,
this feels like vendor procurement, not open source procurement.
well, it's third-party vendor procurement. Yeah, but the open, yeah. So the CISO teams, those teams, if it involves open source, they go through the same procurement processes as a third-party vendor as well. They go through the same clearance pipelines, if you will.
But you don't have a vendor. How does that work?
The difference is for third-party vendors, we can't expose our tool chains to them for evaluation, but we have to set up rules and guidelines for them to follow externally to produce standardized output that we can evaluate. Whereas if it's an existing partner, an open source project, we can actually bring that code in and run it through our canonical tool chains or pipelines to evaluate.
I see, right. But it's the same. I guess in the case of a vendor, you're saying the vendor would do the diligence, but if it's open source, you do the diligence. All right, I'm comfortable calling this third-party vendor procurement. I think that clears it up because it's not open source. I'm gonna even put not open source in the title. Because I do think this is an important persona for us to consider, because if we want to encompass more than just open source in the context of use cases, we need it. It's a thing. And then we also have this downstream customer consumers of products with SBOM. And the intent behind this one was to focus on, like, if I'm an organization and I make an SBOM, that goes to the next place. And that next place isn't always thought about in any meaningful way. And so that's kind of what the idea was here. Yes, I think listing, where are you saying acquisitions there? I am going to write that down, because I think that's an interesting use case that we don't talk about very often. But obviously at this point, if I was acquiring,
I already had the acquisitions comment above.
Wait, where did you put it? What?
Like 2 comments above where yours is.
No, I know. I see your may want to list out.
Oh, sorry.
I put it here. I think that's a good use case, because, like, for example, if I was acquiring a company today, I would totally ask for an SBOM of their product.
Absolutely. We're in that training mode now.
Yeah, I believe it. And I can only imagine the look of horror some companies would have if you ask that.
And I think that this last bullet should be elevated to below developers, because I think that's the most, and actually they might be one of the top most things, because that's what we're lacking is the downstream consumers of open source. They're the ones asking for the information. They're the number one customer. So that persona should be elevated, I think.
So you think you want to move this up to here?
Yeah, because everything in open source as a consumer you talk about consuming the upstream and what are my liabilities, you know? Yeah, it's from a weighting factor. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. Not that the order should matter, but yes. All right, we've only got a few minutes left, so I don't want to dwell on this too much. I want to talk about this section here for a few minutes because we argued over this for a long time 2 weeks ago. And these are a strange laundry list of kind of things that we know are coming, but we don't quite know what to do with them yet. And I
All
think
the machine learning RFC is out for Cyclone DX.
no, I
So
was
that's-
just about to say that Cyclone DX is kind of ahead of many in this space, but sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad because if you, I'm going, I have no opinion of the work Cyclone DX is doing because I haven't even looked at most of it, but the point is, and the reason I wanted to clarify what's happening here is just explaining that these are things we know we need to do, but we don't quite know how they will fit into this group or use cases specifically, is what I tried to push there. And I don't know, does that come across for people who aren't me reading it?
Certainly are topics that people are working on. So
Absolutely. And we
Yeah,
know
and in terms of, I mean, a lot of the stuff we kicked off, all of OpenSSF was kicked off by an executive order, and there is an executive order I can find and annotate that
what?
require that
what?
require.
No. Quick clarification, not true. OpenSSF pre-exists the executive order by years. So
True. Okay. The interest was spiked by.
okay, yes, fair, yes, totally agree with that.
All right. All right. But there is an equally interesting executive order around being able to record cryptographic information and quantum cipher information that
Yes.
has come out. So I can annotate that.
Can you just drop a link to that, Matt, somewhere? I'm not
Yeah,
familiar
that's
with
what I
it.
meant by that's what I meant by annotate. Sorry. Anyways,
Also,
give me a minute. Give me a minute.
Right.
Okay.
also,
And-
did
Alright.
you also Quantum Cipher would be a great name for a band. All right.
All right,
Did you
please get on
trademark
that.
Did you trademark that?
You can't use the band joke without specifying what the genre would be.
Yeah.
Quantum cipher, it's all genres at the same
I think it
time,
would
right?
have to be prog rock, unfortunately.
I don't know,
Yes.
electronica, it would be perfectly reasonable.
I maintain it's quantum with a name like quantum. It can be all styles. at the
Superposition
same
of
time. That's right.
everything.
Until you listen to it and then it picks one.
Gotcha.
I'm really sorry.
No, can't go wrong with
I have a
quantum.
more
How's this?
serious comment. Sorry. I would maybe, so this first sentence under future SBOM considerations, where it says these use cases and considerations are not important today, I would maybe soften that. Like
Yes.
for some folks, these might actually be important use case and considerations, but I think maybe the point here is like these areas that are highlighted are very nebulous and not a lot of definition of how they fit into
I think
SBOM
you-
formats.
Heck, I think you don't even need that first sentence. The following areas are future work that are being considered for SBOMs, period, boom. You don't need most of this intro.
Yes, I think you're right. So would you say that again, David? The following-
Basically, the following areas are being considered for future SBOM work, period, or column, actually. I mean,
Yeah, I like that.
the rest of that, I mean, you don't need it for the intro.
I agree.
And as soon as you jump into the list, it'll become quickly apparent what you're talking about.
I agree. Yep. Okay. And I guess we can also use this to just add things as they might come up and we realize we don't want to do them yet. All right, good, thank you. How we doing? 2 more minutes. All right. So the next part of this, did I fix this? Heading 2, heading 3, yes. So the next part of this, we split the use cases into a couple groups that it's not super easy to understand, but like producers of software is one heading. Consumers of software is another heading. And that's all we have right now. And so do we think, we also don't do a very good job of using our personas in these descriptions, which is fine because the personas aren't very well defined, but we obviously need to define the personas better and then slot personas into use cases in the future. But do we, I guess, just from a high level, are producer and consumer kind of the 2 big buckets that make sense, or can we think of something else we should worry about?
I'm just wondering about the case of where you're producing a software application, but you're also consuming open source software as part of that production process. So which of these 2 buckets
Both.
would that fit into?
Is absolutely both. And we kind of have this listed with software integration, right? Where you've got someone taking in something else as part of their application, but then you also definitely have like, well, we don't do a very good job of describing like making an SBOM and giving it to someone else. I guess it's kind of build time SBOM generation because we talk about downstream, but I think keeping those 2 use cases separate makes sense because even though it's the same thing, I think the activities on each end of the elephant will be pretty different. Or do you disagree? You can disagree. Like I'm glad to listen.
I mean, if you think about the software supply chain, I would argue that it's the default rather than the exception that you're actually both consuming and producing. It's only going to be at one end of the spectrum where you're only a producer or only a consumer, but everything in between, you're actually both consuming and producing. If you think about the software supply chain.
I would agree with that. I think that makes sense. But do we, from this perspective, do we treat that different than being a producer and a consumer, or do we want to create a third thing that's both? Because I think, I mean, from the context you're talking about, the only producers of software are going to be that aren't also consumers are going to be extremely low level things, right? Like insanely low level. In fact, even then, I don't think you can talk about that. Oh, what is, Matt, send a YouTube link. I'm definitely not clicking that right now.
No. It reminded when Rob was talking, it reminded me of an old movie that would probably be lost on younger people. But anyways, I think that producer and consumer are good concepts to have, but I think we need, in terms of use case, we need to talk into specifics of roles we defined above. That's more clear. I don't think that, conceptually it's beneficial to say, like I said, Rob said, I think it's mixed up. So I think we need to discreetly reference the personas, detailed above. Yeah.
Yes, I think you're absolutely correct.
So the movie is, I think, is it Say Anything? And it's Lloyd Dobler.
Oh man, that's holy cow. I think I was in college when that came out. Okay, we shouldn't use these buckets. We should base use cases on the above personas. There will be a huge amount of overlap. All right, I'm just gonna leave it there. Yes, okay, that makes sense. So we'll yank those, so that means we need to rework probably all of these use cases. And I don't think these use cases are very use casey either. Like, I don't think generating an SBOM is a use case. Is it? No, it's not. Distributing an SBOM is a use case.
Why isn't generating an SBOM? Sorry, I think it's a use case. I mean, you.
Build time SBOM generation is just
You're
generating in a
building-
use case though.
You
I
want to
mean,
build, you want to make sure that whenever you build your library or whatever, you're generating one of the artifacts you generate is an SBOM. So,
why?
if somebody asked you to do it.
But that's the use case now, right?
Okay.
But that gets squishy and hard because now you have just distribution to customers, you could have regulation, you could have.
Yeah, the use cases should be linked to the use of the SBOM rather than to the, right, okay, I get it.
Right, but here's my point though. Like saying build time SBOM generation, that isn't a use case, but it encompasses many use cases. So how do we define, like, for example, the needs of a regulator and your internal security team and your customers and all those might say, we want SBOMs, which is functionally the same use case, just with different personas.
Well, I think that we should reference life cycle or extend life cycle that I know Kate has shown many times as part of the ELF Foundation, the life cycle of an SBOM. So I think that the personas acting relative to the life cycle is how you want to probably go about it versus against a specific use case. All right.
I guess my question would be, what is our use case for what we're doing here? So is this for features that we need to support with SBOM? Is this for guidance for folks looking to use SBOM?
These
Does
are
that make sense?
primarily guidance focused.
Okay.
I think it's super important for us to, and I think that's one of the most valuable things that, you know, is that life cycle chart of an SBOM that we should use as a guiding thing. So generation would fall on this cycle.
I'm not convinced because I think the life cycle is the how, and we want to ask the why.
So if my use case is finding a vulnerability relative to an SBOM, so we have a persona, where in the life cycle does that fall? And then what information in the SBOM is relevant to providing information they need to answer or to perform their job.
I understand what you're saying. And I think that what you just described makes sense to me. That's not what I heard the first time though. So yes, I think defining a use case, then defining a persona and defining life cycle. I'm just going to write this down. I'll just write
Then you can
to-
stress what parts of the life cycle, then you can, relative to the information that the life cycle, you know, revolves around, you can highlight different aspects of life cycle where that data was created, where it was sourced, where it was added to the SBOM, and how it's used after the fact. How is it reposited?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Josh Bucher just asked. Is this, I don't know.
Is this, yeah, is this the one we're talking about, or are we talking about a different life cycle?
I've never.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that document. I was thinking about the one that often appears in the LF presentations for SPDX SBOM.
Yeah,
That's the one
Kate has a document somewhere.
So maybe we grab that and stick it in the document so it's easy to find.
Yeah, I'll say here.
But I think that document you linked, if it's coming from CISA, I think CISA is where they're hashing out the normative nomenclature and semantics and things like that. So over time, we might want to reference that the graphic from historical graphic, but we might want to make sure we follow what CISA is doing in terms of semantics and nomenclature.
I agree. I don't know what is, oh, this is from the DOE. This is a CISA doc, but the Department of Energy wrote it. I have no idea. I'm going to read this later though. I've never seen this. April 23. That's got to be pretty new. I don't know when this came out.
Basically, I just
23 days.
I just Googled SBOM lifecycle and that was the top result.
Interesting. All right. All right. Well, we're about out of time and I've got another meeting in a little bit. So I want to go to use the restroom. But this has been, oh my goodness, this was drinking from the fire hose. I thought this would be an easy, simple meeting. This is good though. This is really good. I feel like this is why I like having a smaller group, because I think it's a more candid discussion. So, all right, I'm gonna send us on our way. I would say if anyone has time, look through all this stuff, add more comments or questions. I think we need to rework all of these use cases though. I don't think many of these are actually use cases in the context of what we just talked about.
I think I think this document needs some reorganization too, and I'm reluctant to
Oh, yeah.
to do that without to move things around and without more eyes on it. So, yeah.
So you've got two options, Dan. You could either just make a copy and butcher it and then show everyone else, or just do it. Fuck it, Josh gave you permission.
I'll think about it. Yeah.
All right. All right. I have no issue with you like gutting it. I think that's fine. I think we can go back in time. There's history. Like if
Yeah.
someone's completely opposed, which no one will be, because let's face it, like this is totally, if you do the work, you get to make the decisions. Like I'm a huge proponent of that. So is this Kate's document you just linked? Yes, there is the
Yeah.
picture.
Well, that's not the canonical place it's presented, but that was copied there. And
Oh,
so
okay.
anyway.
But yes,
But
that is
I
the
put the
picture I was thinking.
I put the link in the comment in the chat as well. So it's in the doc. So there's a comment too.
Oh, did you? Good, perfect. All right. All right. I'm gonna bail so I can get ready for my next meeting. I'll talk to y'all soon. All right, bye
Thanks.
everyone. Thank you.
Ciao.
See it.